It's good to talk. Even better to have someone say something back. A chat, a chinwag, a natter. Effective communication engages a lot more complexities than one would expect. And certainly in my case, the art of comfortable expression is not my forte. I use long-winded journeys to reach simple destinations. I misread body language and rooms to often middling outcomes or worse. I can't do small talk. Not in my workplace or in online spaces. Because there's no natural inflection in my voice, even when I'm passionate about something, it doesn't always come across as particularly engaging. Engaging ends up being the key word here, because when some people put you off your rhythm, it's not always about ideologies or intellectual principles, but rather this more abstract idea of passing or failing a vibe check. Cosmic energy in synchronicity, this fundamental dark art that forms the core of any relationship, be it business or pleasure, is something that eludes some folk, myself included. We get by because we have to. We find ways of getting our point across, and so long as we don't get too bogged down in the sophistication and artistry of speech, we live our lives well, comfortable and even happy. But there's something incredibly alienating about failing the vibe check, especially if it keeps happening. It becomes a black knot in your psyche, one that might limit your pursuit of the life you desire. If people just don't get you, what can you do? I had this phenomenon in mind while playing Signs of the Sojourner, a game that is fundamentally about the intersection of expression, understanding and relationships. And it ended up being an incredibly cathartic experience, because Signs of the Sojourner knows what the struggle to connect really means, but it also knows not to place that burden entirely on your shoulders. The game has you joining a caravan as it travels from town to town, peddling wares and engaging with a wide range of people, both in terms of commerce and culture. You're there to find items to sell in your shop and to find out more about your late mother's life. You can stay with the caravan or break off into your own small adventure, and while there are consequences for these choices, there aren't really any fail states to punish you for choosing the wrong path. It has touches of 80 days in its presentation and structure, although instead of one big journey, it's split into 5 return trips that have you revisit the lives of those in the towns you pass through. It's also a deck building game, but not a normal one. The symbols on your cards represent different, I suppose methods of conversation is the best way to describe it. Do you appeal to logic or emotion, perform the hard sell or celebrate ingenuity? This isn't a subjective or subtle mechanic. The game tells you up front what kind of symbols the other person has in their arsenal, an abstraction of the type of personality they possess. And here, your goal isn't to beat your opponent, because a mismatched symbol for either party leads to a bad outcome. In order to succeed at a conversation, you both have to keep matching cards, or at least utilising the ancillary rules and additional effects to keep a chain going. On paper, that sounds like a cold, calculating endeavour, one that celebrates a successful interaction as the result of a jigsaw-like perfect alignment. In execution, however, that abstraction feels less absolute, because although it does paint conversations as a jigsaw, it's the kind of jigsaw that's a little rough around the edges, and sometimes even if a piece doesn't quite fit perfectly, you can still find a way to jam it in. Crucially, it's also a jigsaw that neither party necessarily has all the right pieces for. It is impossible to have the right deck for all the encounters you have along your journey. The characters you come into contact with are just too different. As soon as you become comfortable with a group from one town, just a few miles down the road a new symbol is thrown into the mix that leaves you, well, speechless, scrambling to adapt to new idioms and conversational tactics because language itself is not an absolute. Eventually, you build up enough variety in the cards in your roster to make it through some conversations in most towns successfully. The additional effects on some cards and a few accommodations from those that you converse with make things more manageable. You may grow wise to what you need to become au fait with the people of a particular town, using the stops along the journey as an opportunity to slowly morph your deck into something that gives you an edge later down the line. It's a double-edged sword though. Your deck remains limited throughout, as do the new cards you have access to. For everything gained from experience, something from the past must be given up. And no matter how far you travel on your journey, you inevitably have to return home. And sometimes, when you come back, it doesn't really feel like home anymore. As open-ended and broad a game Signs of the Sojourner is, the most striking part of its narrative for me is that rigidity to be found at the end of each cycle. While primarily about saving your hometown from being dropped from the caravan route, the game for me quickly became a more personal story about a long-term friendship falling apart. You've come back so changed by the people you've tried to connect with after each trip with the caravan that you find those you've shared your life with more and more alien. Never mind the bright colours, the funky soundtrack and the quirky cast of characters, this is a sad story. One that was difficult for me to come to terms with because it echoed the daily struggle I have had for years to form a meaningful relationship with those around me, or at least the kind of relationship that I want. It's a game that contends with the internal conflict of how much of yourself you change to accommodate strangers who might not have been willing to do the same for you, and how much of yourself do you keep to help maintain relationships with your past. Having lived away from my home county for many years now, I know that balance all too well, and I know that some of the choices you make can lead to no one really understanding you anymore. Signs of the Sojourner quickly became a lens through which I took stock of my own inability to connect with others. And while some of that introspection wasn't all that pleasant, it also helped me to realize that a good relationship is a two-way street. You don't have to do all the heavy lifting. Sometimes you have to trust that the other person wants to connect as much as you do, and it's comforting to know that I'm not alone with this.